thanks everyone. Great to be here. I'm Emma Gremley. I'm the Senior Director for Education and Economic Development at the International Rescue Committee, IRC, which is a humanitarian organisation that works in about 50 countries and supports education for populations in conflict and crisis in about 20 in the education space. I'm going to talk very briefly about some of the work that we've been doing around education and climate. I normally do this in about a one-day workshop, but I have 3 minutes. So fortunately, Shweta has already done much of the background work, so we know why this is an issue, and of course, you will all know this from your own experience. So what we're going to talk about today is a couple of solutions or things that we've been working on to try and address some of these challenges for the populations we work with. And we're going to focus on an area called disaster risk finance or pre-arranged finance. Very quickly, I'm going to skip on to this slide here. Pre-arranged finance is basically about putting in place 3 building blocks to deal with crisis events, in this case, climate events. It's about making sure that you have the financing in place in advance of a crisis, so you know where money is going to come from. It's making sure that you have the operations in place. You know when that money will be triggered and how it will be transferred, and you know what the use of proceeds is for. You know what the money will be spent on. And those 3 criteria are absolutely critical for responding to a crisis event. Very quickly, I will tell you about a pilot that we are doing here in Kenya with FCDO funding. This is in 2 counties in Kenya, and it's to try and mitigate the effects of drought on schools in Garissa and Tana River. This is because many kids will drop out of school, many families will migrate to other areas during drought periods, and they will lose learning and lose well-being. We have put in place a parametric insurance. In this case, it's a trigger that is based on the drought or dryness levels, vegetation levels. When that trigger is reached, a payout will come to the IRC. The IRC, who has been funded by FCDO to take out this insurance, will respond in 3 ways. We will give cash transfers to the families. That's to mitigate the loss of school feeding and also support them. Many of them will be travelling at the time. And it's also to keep in touch with the families so we don't lose them when they move on. We can find them again thereafter. We're giving remote education. And I think we heard earlier about some AI activities and EdTech activities. So we're giving education through mobile phones, through WhatsApp and through SMS messages, concentrating on just maintaining those core skills, foundational skills, so that kids don't fall behind and drop out. And then we're focusing on child protection as well. It's to try and keep children safe and well and learning in periods when we know they're not in school, and then to make sure they return thereafter. And we've got an RCT being carried out with Oxford University. This, I don't have time to talk about. It is part of a bigger effort to have an Education Resilience Finance Pact. This looks at how we can make sure we can pre-arrange finance across the sector, the education sector, both on the sovereign side and the non-formal education and the international community side, with a coordination in the centre. Again, we don't have time to go into details, so I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jeff, who's going to talk about another specific example in Bangladesh.
Thanks, Emma. So the IRC, obviously as a humanitarian organization, we support about 3,000 refugee children in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. And Bangladesh is one of the most impacted countries as a result of climate change. And what we saw last year in Bangladesh was about 25% of school days were actually lost. And this was both for natural disasters, so we just heard about extreme heat. Schools were closed for 2 weeks because of extreme heat, but also heavy rainfall, flooding, landslides, in addition to man-made and political events that disrupted education. So we're starting already at a really low and challenging level of learning, and then kids are losing about 25% of their schooling days. We did an assessment in the refugee camps in Cox's Bazar, and what we saw, again, this mirrors what we just heard before, that extreme heat is having the biggest impact on teachers, on learners, and then floods were number 2. But again, this issue of extreme heat is really making it almost impossible to teach and learn in the refugee camps of Cox's Bazar. Most of the schools are not fixed structures. There's no air conditioning. It's quite a challenging context to begin with. And again, we see this from our teachers. It just really saps the motivation of teachers, the ability to deliver instruction, and learners' ability to focus and concentrate in the classroom. And this is what one of our learning centers in the refugee camps looks like. So what we've been doing as the IRC, we've been leading a group of about 25 organizations through the education cluster in Cox's Bazar to develop a new anticipatory action framework to address specific issues just like extreme heat, but also cyclones and flooding. And the goal with anticipatory action is to act before the acute onset of the crisis. So we know that if we wait until after the event, it's much less impactful. So acting early, acting ahead of time, and using better forecasting data to understand which natural disaster, whether it's extreme heat, flooding, or cyclones, is most likely to hit the camps and when that's going to happen. So again, this framework is being developed right now, and our goal is that all of the major education actors in the refugee camps in Bangladesh have the information that they need to act early to address some of these major issues that we're seeing on children's learning. Thanks.
Thank you. So thank you, Jeff and Emma. I'm going to hand over to Joel.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joel Elphas, and I'm the founder of Tanzania Early Childhood Education and Care, TECEC organization. We are much focusing to support the communities specific on addressing developmental delays among young children, specific children aged 0 to 5. And we are doing this because in Tanzania, more than 53% of young children aged 2 to 5 are experiencing developmental delays. And our model of echoes of first years, we are collaborating to introduce community CD center within community spaces, but also early stimulation hub within community health centers, but also parenting program. When it is come to climate change, young children are the most affected, and that's why we are also including climate action specific for young children, as we are working also to planting climate resilience through play, learning, but also community action for young children. Next slide. For instance, we have, let me share just a short story about Neema. Neema, she's just 5 years old, but she's a little climate defender, specific in our community, in Mwanza region, where it is a lake zone. On the first day, May 2025, Neema, she led a group of other students, of young children, to get to the lake to do the cleanup. And she got a very strong question to ask: why adults are destroying our planet? That's a very strong question that Neema shared. And she leading, as you can see on the picture, she leading the rest of the children, and they are saying, we are going to take an action as the children because this planet is for them, and we adults, we are destroying. As you can see, those plastics that within the lakes, as always, not these children who are responsible to put them, it is we adults. So that's why they're asking why we adults are destroying their planet. And they had a very bold message for all of us, like, oh, we are going to protect the planet now and even when they become adult. So as an ECD organization, we are working also to empower early years teachers. Specific now, we are working to equip them how they can integrate climate education for young children, and we are collaborate with actuaries to implement their curriculum for early years teachers. And now we see many teachers making lesson climate integrated. We see teachers using the classes to integrate climate. For instance, we can see now children are learning on how to count in math lessons, but also they're exploring storytelling about tree planting, specific in literacy session. And this has got many effects specific on the community, because it's not only ending at the school. These children are taking this lesson to their families and their communities. And one of the parents, they shared like, oh, my child reminded me to cover the water container. But also now one of the parents also shared like, we are now composed because my son just learned it at the schools. So that's why all of us, we have the opportunity, and we need to continue to empower young children so that they can take part in climate all the way from their early years. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joel. I think that was really powerful. I find the community ripple effect point so powerful that kids can go back home and then have that kind of impact on their parents' behavior. So thank you for sharing. Jenny, over to you.
Great, thanks, Shweta. I'm going to stand up because I'm the last speaker, and this way I can see if anyone's fallen asleep. And I'm better standing up. So I'm Jenny Groot, and I'm from PEAS. So PEAS, we exist to expand inclusive quality education, and we do that through our schools and work with government. Today I'm going to focus on our schools mostly in this discussion. Climate is something that we've given quite a bit of thought to, but maybe unlike Earth Warriors and IRC, it's not the only thing we do. We're running our schools. We have 30 schools, secondary schools in Uganda, and in Zambia we have 8 primary, 8 secondary. So I'm not going to dwell on the macro impacts of climate. I think it's interesting to think about the big deals, the ones that we know about, where schools are completely closed because of what's happening. But also for us, it hasn't completely closed our schools, but it has raised a lot of problems. One example I would give is in Zambia. So last year in Zambia, because of the drought, many learners struggled to attend school because they didn't have the money that they needed to make that journey or to buy their uniform. But more obviously, we had power cuts across the country. So I don't know if other people saw this in the news, but at one point in Zambia last year, for a number of months, we had power cuts for 23 hours a day. So if you're a school leader running a secondary school with an ICT lab or a water pump, all of those things become something that you're constantly thinking about. How are you going to manage to use the ICT lab? Most of our schools didn't manage to use them at all. Often the hour of power they had was in the middle of the night. You know, who is waking up on the school compound to go and turn on the water pump when the power comes on in the middle of the night? And then also kind of challenges that you just don't think about, like how small businesses fail when, you know, you're a shop owner and you no longer have a refrigerator. The only reason people are coming to your shop is for something that they can't refrigerate at home. Now that you no longer have a refrigerator, your business is essentially defunct. So thinking about the impact on the systems around our schools as well as the schools themselves is something that we've had to do a lot. In terms of how we think about climate at PEAS, because we're a network rather than an individual school, we've had to think quite carefully about how we prioritize it. There's a lot of things our schools have to deliver, and we know that we can't just suddenly pivot everything towards climate. But we do think about 4 particular areas where we're thoughtful about integrating climate into our work. So the first of those is around changing mindsets and behavior. So this is a lot of the stuff that the Earth Warriors curriculum does too, kind of raising people's understanding. We have the Earth Warriors curriculum in our primary schools. We also do this increasingly through kind of things integrated through the curriculum, like project learning, but really taking advantage of agriculture lessons or entrepreneurship lessons to think about how those areas of work when our students leave school will be affected by the climate crisis. The second is around collective activism. Any of us with teenagers at home or who are teaching teenagers know that there's a huge issue around climate anxiety now. There are enough challenges that our communities are already facing, but if you add climate onto that as well, there's a real uncertainty of whether these young people are going to be able to ever get a job, ever even continue the subsistence agriculture that their parents have been doing. So shifting that anxiety into a feeling of empowerment is a really important piece, both at primary and at secondary. So for us, that means kind of creating things like co-curricular clubs, student groups, and also using the way that we teach our learners to help them become leaders in their community. If you're creating learners who have that ability to lead, to problem solve, to be creative in a difficult situation, they're much more likely to be able to deal with a big climate crisis than those who've never been given those skills to problem solve and work with others. Thirdly, we think about the green economy transition. So our schools are extremely rural, and we know that as people get all excited about the investment flowing into countries around specific areas of STEM and all of these kind of new cool agriculture ideas, none of those are reaching the kind of learners that we work with. So we're thinking really deliberately about what our STEM curriculum looks like, and also again what that entrepreneurship and livelihoods looks like, so that our learners are able to engage in that green economy transition rather than being left behind by it like they have been from other transitions within their countries. And then lastly, and this is maybe a little bit unique to Pease as a school operator, is community infrastructure. So for many of our communities, the secondary schools that we have in particular, but often the primary schools as well, are the biggest kind of infrastructure or institution that they engage with on a regular basis. They're either coming in to drop their kids off at a primary school in the day, or they might be coming once or twice a term if they're boarding in our secondary schools. But this is an opportunity for people who often live in an extremely remote village to see a sizable piece of infrastructure. And we see that as actually a really big opportunity, because that's a chance for those people to see, like whether it's the parents or the learners themselves, what the power is of resilient infrastructure, whether that's how you integrate solar with the grid in a time where you want to be spending as little on power as possible, but you're in a place where the power cuts come all the time, whether it's water tanks like you can see in the picture, whether it's rainwater harvesting and the power of rainwater harvesting in drought areas. We also think about things like the use of shade. We were talking about in the Earth Warriors curriculum, helping people understand which trees grow fastest and cheapest. How can you most quickly get shade in your community so that you're kind of building out the lowest cost ways to deal with the heat waves that are coming. So both from a perspective of creating schools which are resilient to heat waves and droughts, but also in terms of the ripple effect of that within our communities, we feel like infrastructure can have a really big role to play. And then just very quickly, because this is very much Pease's passion where we started, secondary is such a massive deal here. Anyone working at a secondary level, really I would just implore you to think about the climate side of your work. Secondary is such a critical age, that adolescent phase, for making a difference about whether a young person is going to continue to exacerbate the challenges for climate in their community or be a real force for good and change. And so particularly girls, we see as kind of grabbing this with both hands and having a huge ability to impact both their families and the wider community that they go back to. So for us, really advocating for secondary education as an important way to tackle the climate crisis and the resilience to that crisis is something that we talk about a lot. Looking ahead, we're really keen to learn from others in this space. It's changing all the time. We're kind of, really fans of doing things quickly, learning, iterating, sharing. So just get in touch if you'd like to know more.
Thank you, Jenny. That was amazing. And I think a really important point that we hadn't touched on before that you spoke about was on the climate and eco-anxiety piece. And it's really important, I think, to think about how education can help alleviate some of that, because there was some research done recently in Australia where a group of politicians tried to ban climate education for young children because they said it causes climate anxiety. So I think some of these things do need a lot more kind of research and conversation on. So thank you. We'd love to hear if any of you have any questions for our amazing speakers here today. So we'd love to take 2 or 3 questions from the room. Any questions for our panelists? I see.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. You are touching up topic that is dear to my heart. One of the things that I would maybe want to hear from you is in most cases, as I was growing up, things to do with climate action, for example, planting trees, keeping the maybe schools clean, was taken as a punishment for either doing something wrong within the class or within the school. And in most cases, this deterred so many of us who are growing up from taking action to make sure that whatever we are doing it or we are supporting climate. So at this, maybe would ask, what are you doing great so that the children are not looking as this is a punishment that I'm taking, so it is something that I am making sure that the future generation are getting the right or the heart or whatever we are doing to the environment is great. So what are some of the things that you are doing to change that? And I must admit it is still affecting most of our generation.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. So in the AI panel this morning, I actually talked a little bit about how some of the ministries that we work with through AI Observatory are thinking about integrating technology to help predict disruptions to schools. So looking across education, health, and climate data to be able to use technology to be a bit more proactive in mitigating disruptions. And I just wanted to hear from the panel, what are you learning about the role of technology, specifically emerging technologies, in kind of helping to give governments more insight into this?
Thanks. My name is Meredith. We work with rural government schools. And one of the things that we find is that as soon as there's a bad harvest, nobody can pay school fees, and there's a lot of food insecurity. So have you guys found anything that helps to offset that?
Thank you. Okay. Just one. So my name is Amna, and I'm a homeopath. And when I observe the similarities between the dis-ease or the disease that we all seem to be suffering from in terms of climate, it seems very similar to when I do a homeopathic consultation with a patient, and there's like a deeper understanding that is needed in terms of not just the physical issues, but really what is the dis-ease, what is the disbalance and the harmony. What I'm getting a sense of, and again, please excuse me, but I'm just entering this, but I see tactical or maybe a little bit patchy, and not, we're all trying, but I don't see an integrated or understanding of, in terms of the root causes, as well as trying to see how we can restore the balance back. So this is just a humble opinion, sort of a view, in terms of if we do not have a holistic view, perhaps the solutions that we will end up doing will be tactical and will be temporary and will not solve for the dis-ease that globally as a community we're facing. And it is very similar to an individual's disease. Thank you.
Thank you. I know lots of questions, but let's take this round first. So just to summarize, we have a question on how do we make sure that when we're making children do climate education activities like planting trees, they don't see it as a punishment, but they love it. Another question on how we're leveraging, how we could potentially leverage technology to predict some of these climate disasters. Another question on whether we've seen that if livelihoods are affected because of extreme weather events that cause things like droughts, does that impact school attendance and learning? And then how can we have a more holistic view of the climate and education system to come up with solutions? So would anyone like to go first?
I'm not going to answer that first question. I think that's better over here, but I will answer the ones on AI. and the school fees. So on the AI piece, we're already using AI to predict weather events through the fall. We at IRC we have a follow the forecast methodology where we look at the long range forecasts and we use those to predict where most likely they're going to have a climate event. And in those countries, we do a rapid assessment, we do a rapid review, and then we give cash in advance for an anticipatory action program. We also use AI in the parametric insurance program as well, again, to do that predictive analytics. It's very easy to do for weather because we have 40 years of weather data to build on. We're starting to see the use of AI to predict population flows and population movements using a whole range of other triggers beyond weather data. And so there's a program being done by the World Bank in Uganda where about 90 indicators are used and followed to predict population flows from DRC into Uganda and pre-position education, health and water responses. So as the technology increases and as we get better predictive analytics, we can do this beyond weather. So just to flag that. On the school fees piece and the bad harvest, so interestingly, what we found in some of our research was that education was affected much earlier than the other sectors because as soon as families or communities think that they're at risk of a climate event, particularly drought or a bad harvest, they cut back on expenses. And the first expense to be cut back on is often school. And so that will happen long before you see crop failure or livestock death or other things. So one of the things we're looking at as well is whether we can bundle payouts to families. So there's increasing amounts of livestock and agriculture insurance that pays out at the end of the season. What we often find is kids have been out of school for 4 to 6 months before the payout comes. There's a way that we can integrate an early payout and offset that against a later payout to make sure that the kids don't miss school in the first place. And so it's thinking creatively about cash programs and other types of social protection programs that are in place, whether they're private or public, and how we can integrate the education sector, even when they're not in sectors that we could be thinking about and that we traditionally engage with. So it's that integrated perspective. And then the last thing on that root causes, we didn't have time to go through it, but in this Education Resilience Finance Pact, one of the things that we focus on is how you look at mitigation and adaptation alongside response. And so a lot of the climate funds, education only gets 0.001% of climate funds as it is. But if we work together as a sector to say from the adaptation fund, we need a special education window where we can start adapting our school infrastructure to make it better ventilated for heat, to make there be flood barriers, etc. So there's adaptation. There's also the mitigation piece that needs to come into play as well, and thinking about how that can affect the education system to try and stop those root causes, alongside dealing with the very real effects that we're seeing right now in the responses. So I would love to talk to you all because there's a huge role for non-state actors if we can, and the international community, if we can pool resources and we can pool risk, we can respond much better to this. But there isn't time to go into full details today, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Joel, would you like to?
Yes, specific on the question, what we are doing to make sure children are growing up, taking climate action. As I said, mostly we are training their teachers, specific early years teachers, so that they can integrate climate education for young children all the way from the early years. And this is very powerful because these children grow up while they now understand their role on how to protect the climate. But also there are different activities that these young children are engaging, like tree planting, but also community cleanup. They are not taking like a punishment, but it's a part of making sure they protect their planet. So just briefly, that is one of the things that we are doing to make sure children are also taking part on climate change, because as the one most affected when it comes to impact of climate change.
Yeah, just one thing to add there. We found, and I think the evidence shows this as well, but our experience is that extracurricular approaches to climate are much stronger than forced curriculum based, partly because curriculum is so slow to change. You're looking at least a 10-year cycle, but I think also because of that point, that if students are forced to pick up litter, then it feels like a punishment. And it is a punishment still, you know, even in our schools, to be honest. It still is something that our teachers would always choose as a punishment. But I think we do see learners being very proactive about wanting to do community clear-ups if it's come up with by themselves as one of the ways that they want to engage the community. We also see it as a powerful transition thing, actually, like learners getting out into the community regularly to take climate action can also engage primary learners who then see those students and feel like they're having a lot of fun doing their community action, and it makes them feel more confident about joining secondary school. So it has a nice parallel effect there as well. And just your point on like, is this addressing the kind of core point of climate change? One of the things that we decided very explicitly in our climate approach is that we wouldn't take the position that our learners or communities in any way should be trying to mitigate climate change, actually. Like if there are small things they're doing, then great. But the focus that we're putting on is adapting and being more resilient to it, because the amount of contribution that these communities have made to climate change is minuscule. And so to then push additional cost or additional effort onto communities that are already really struggling just doesn't feel like the right balance. So yeah, sometimes it may come across more tactical than it could do, because we're sort of ignoring an elephant in the room in a very deliberate way. And we also take that same view on our infrastructure. If someone has a really cool climate resilient infrastructure, but it's incredibly expensive, then we say no, because I'd rather build 3 classrooms than 1. And at the end of the day, there's so many students outside of school. Like this isn't the place where we should be bearing an enormous cost, things like infrastructure, just in order to mitigate the climate crisis. So yeah, that's sort of a decision we took on purpose.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing all of your perspectives. Great points. I know there were more hands up for questions, but we're not going to take them. You'll have lots of time later to speak to everyone, but I'm going to hand over for the next 5 minutes to Kiara and Ajay. And we're moving into a bit of an energizer and breaking out into groups. So please stand up, everyone.
Great, but before that, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Jenny. Please, thank you very much, and a round of applause for them. Thank you very much. Thank you, Shweta.